He is the author of Get in the Game, which is available now, and he is the professor of mathematics and computer science at Davidson College. We have the pleasure in welcoming Tim Chartier onto Hoopsology. Welcome, Tim.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it. We always love discussing different aspects of sports, especially analytics, and it's always a fascinating topic. So, in terms of the book, just kind of with a basic question, what was the inspiration with the book? Because I think it's very unique compared to other books about mathematics and analytics and relationship with data in sports.
Yeah, one of the basic questions that's kind of approached in the book is that if you're just watching a game or a sporting event, you suddenly just I wonder how improbable that was. It derives simple ways that you can roll a die or flip a coin or things like that. Or maybe in one part, it even shows how to use a computer program if you wanted to actually begin to estimate what those probabilities would be. You don't need to know if something's highly improbable, it doesn't matter if it's 1 in 500 million or 1 in 612,300,000. That doesn't matter, because either way, it's like, wow, that's why I'm not going to just talk about this tomorrow. I'm going to be talking about this 3 months from now. And so it helps to kind of uncover that a certain amount of analytics in certain arenas estimation is entirely fine. And it gives you a good feeling for some of the splendidness of sports that we so enjoy. And we can tell sometimes a thing improbable because we only talk about it around the water cooler. It's sensational, but not necessarily memorable because we're not talking about it even at the water cooler the next day. So that's kind of the inspiration of the book.
So we're a basketball show, but your book covers all sports, and I'm just wondering, just through your research, and you're very passionate about mathematics, which sport do you think has the most unique relationship with math? I mean, we're biased. We love hoops on this channel, but you're more qualified in this realm. So, like, from your research and what you've gathered, do you think all sports have their own unique relationship with math, that it's undistinguishable, or do you think one sport has more of a relationship with mathematics?
In many ways, baseball has the strongest tie to mathematics because it's discrete. And you know that the pitcher throws the ball, you know the hitter is trying to hit the ball, you know where the ball went. There are certain moments that might be a little more difficult to quantify exactly who was responsible for something. Then comes basketball. Basketball was kind of that second wave of analytics, at least in the world that I've moved, where when I started, there wasn't a lot of basketball analytics going around. It was around, but it was fairly new. So when we began it here at Davidson College, that was a very new thing to be doing it at the college level. That's not true now. It's very, very common. Right now, we're in kind of the advent of football analytics. We see a lot of football analytics. We see it, like even the fact that when you watch a football game, that they won't just go, I cannot believe they're going for it on 4th down. You can even hear the announcers talking about when it makes sense. You know, 5, or just take 10, or I'm old enough, take 20 years ago. I mean, you could lose your job even mentioning it. And so, like, even having someone go on the field, you might have lost your job. And so that's where we begin to see the change of analytics. But I've worked with the U.S. Olympic Committee across several sports. You know, they use it to help our Olympic athletes. They help it with even just getting a sense of who the competition will be. And one of the other big arenas of analytics that sometimes people don't think about in sports is the anti-injury, and trying to keep athletes healthy and on the field and in college, that they can enjoy athletics, maybe not at the professional level, but at the casual level that so many former athletes really want to enjoy for the rest of their lives.
Tim, can you unpack what you just said for us and maybe give us an example or two in terms of how injury analytics are used? I find that
Sure.
fascinating.
Yeah, let me give you an example from our research. So our women's soccer team uses polar heart monitors. These are devices that are just worn around the chest, and they keep track of your heart rate.
Yeah.
Polar found that, at least at the time we were doing the research, that the higher your heart rate, the more, it's called a load, the more load, the more you're working out, and that you were given points for the load, and you don't want over 1,200 points in a week, because they found that could lead to late season burnout. And when we're talking burnout, we're not talking 1 or 2 days of lighter. We're talking that kind of burnout where It just takes a while. And the issue was that in college sports, this level of burnout was often happening right around the conference tournament time, which is the worst time it could happen. So they gave us all that work, and then or all of that input from Polar. Then they gave us their data, and it's a very typical analytics question: do something with this. So here it is. Please do something. And I was working with a member of the soccer team who was a goalie on the team, a math and computer science double major. And she really did most of the work. This is one of those times where I guess I'm a mentor, but I'm more of a cheerleader, because she really took the lead on it. But what we found was that depending on the offensive style of the other team, as quantified by our coaches, they actually could figure out how the different positions, what load they would have, just essentially on average, but it wasn't with a huge amount of variance with the team that they were about to play. And the reason that plays into injury is it told them how much to practice the different positions prior to the game. And that's one of the big places. You can see it in basketball. That's part of the reason we see Stephen Curry not play a whole game all the time, is that part of the reason they're doing that is to give him just that sustained performance over the whole year. And all of those things play in, and different teams have different ways they do it. And again, that has to do with the conditioning and the type of analytics and the type of approach too. Analytics have to fit the team approach as well. You can't just have analytics that sound great and nobody wants to do it.
Awesome. Fascinating stuff. I want to zoom out a little bit, kind of more to the analytics in general topic, and you with someone right on the pulse of analytics. When you see things and the analytics discussion in typical sports media, how do you perceive the framing of analytics? Do you think it's framed fairly in things that we're seeing, not pointing the finger, but just as an example, like on ESPN or other broadcasts?
One of the big things with analytics is sometimes it's not framed fairly, and it's not necessarily the people behind the desk that are, the athletes or the commentators, because it's an approach that many of us, and an outlook many of us have about analytics, and that's that analytics sees itself as truth. Analytics is not truth. They're all math models. They're all just a model of what data gives as an opinion. So that's the way when we work with coaches, we just say, here is another opinion coming from data. And one of the big parts of a sports analyst is to help a coach, if you're working with a coach, understand the boundaries of what you've done, so that if what is happening on the field is at or beyond the boundary, you just need to make your own call, because what we did doesn't relate to that. And sometimes they don't know. And that's why with the students I work with, I often say, if the coach overrides our decision, they're right. And the reason I say it like that is they have to make the call in the moment, and they can't just believe that what we're saying is just truth, because it won't always be truth. It's just an opinion.
It seems like so often, just anecdotally from what I see, it's kind of framed as a lot of arguments or topics are as sort of like a binary, like you go the analytics route, or you go the, I don't know, old school, like go by gut or instinct or however you want to frame it, which I think you make pretty clear in your answer that it's not that way.
No, analytics is the most powerful when you have people who understand the sport from the experience level and from the gut level. There are many, many times when analytics will actually support your gut, but you no longer need to worry, is it just my gut? Because if most people are honest, I know some people are heavily opinionated, but most people would say when it's truly your gut, like you just kind of have a feeling. I mean, March Madness definitely underscores that our gut is not 100% accurate. I mean, we just are wrong all over the place. But at the same time, you can take what someone understands and then build insight from that. Even if it's just underscoring, you no longer have to put intellectual thought and energy into it. And one of the hardest analytics moments is when you come up with something new. When it's something that's counter, you have to spend a lot of time being absolutely sure that you're actually going to present that. And so it plays both roles, and both are very important.
So have you noticed with analytics playing more of a role in mainstream sports that coaches are becoming more comfortable with analytics because there are critics that, like Matt was referring to, that there might be resistant, but yeah, this is part of sports culture nowadays. It's everyday place. Have you noticed that there's less resistance in terms of just using analytical data?
Yes, there's a huge change in that. And we'll continue to see that more and more. For one thing, I see it particularly at the athlete level. Many athletes are very interested in analytics or already do analytics. We had a Davidson alum that went from Davidson and actually tried out for the Olympic bobsled team. And he actually began training for the Olympic bobsled and almost made the last Olympics. Well, the way bobsled works is you basically enter a combine where you perform in different events because he's from the United States. He isn't going to have bobsled experience. And if you perform at a certain level, then you go and try out at Lake Placid. So he actually used analytics to tell him during the day how he was doing and if he'd need to do better than average on coming events. And he used analytics for all of that, fully understanding that that would help his performance both in training and in the actual performance that particular day. And I'm not sure you would have seen that as much 15 years ago because it just wasn't really part of what, not that nobody was doing it, but it's so much more around us now that I think it feels like a tool that you can use. One of the big things in sports is that you don't have to listen to it all the time, but if you're not listening to it at all, you can end up falling behind. And I think we'll see that more and more in coming years.
So AI is all the rage now. How do you think that's going to play a role within analytics? Do you think it's going to eliminate the human component completely, or do you think it's going to be using AI as a tool? How does artificial intelligence factor into just the future analytics in sports, you think?
The human element won't go away. For one thing, humans need to code the AI.
Sure.
But underneath your question isn't so much that. It's like, well, okay, once we've coded it, what will that mean? Well, I think anyone that puts something into Chat GPT and you even put your own name in, a lot of it's right. And then it suddenly just hallucinates. And it's just like, what in the world is this thing talking about? That's intrinsic to AI. That AI is predicting things. It's predicting in Chat GPT what to say. And so you need a human to actually look at that. And AI is not completely new. Some of the things that we talk about as AI have been done for the last 10 to 15 years. And so that said, we've seen monumental steps in some of it. So I don't know exactly what it'll be, but you need a human checking that. And you need a human determining, again, is it actually applicable to what we're seeing? And even more when it comes to sports, generally AI is not good at outlier behavior. And what I mean by that is that if you take Stephen Curry, can you project his career? No. Well, no, I mean, if you really looked at it, no, because there isn't a Stephen Curry for the machine learning to understand. And so it's going to do really well at average behavior. It's going to do really well at maybe slightly above average behavior. But you can take outlier both way. You take really crappy behavior, like really bad, and really, really good, and it's going to struggle at both of those. And that's just intrinsic. Maybe it'll overcome that, but that's going to, I don't know. That's the nature of outliers.
I find it comforting that you're assuring me there's still going to be a human element involved here, given
Yeah.
all the talk about AI recently. Wanted to ask, just kind of pick your brain. You mentioned what's being used for athletes with recovery, which is awesome. Where do you see analytics going in terms of what we're able to capture right now and what we may be able to perceive? If I can ask you to look into the crystal ball 5-10 years down the road, what may be possible with what we can capture?
One of the big things in basketball is that we've had what's called center of mass data at the NBA level. Center of mass data is just an XY coordinate. If you just think of back in grade school where you put things down on a piece of paper and there were the two axes, we've had that for players. You see it on TV all the time where they show you where they shot from, for instance. That's an XY location. And then the ball, it's had XYZ, three-dimensional behavior on the ball. And we've had that in the NBA since, I believe, 2013. Suddenly, we're now getting what I call stick figure data, where it's actually telling you at the joint level what's happening at the wrist, what's happening at the elbow. And you have all of that behavior of the actual athlete. Once you uncork that much data, it's the Wild West. Because in the beginning, when they had that XY, they didn't even know when the ball went in. I mean, if you think about it, would you actually know in all cases that when the ball went in? And if you think about it very much, it gets kind of complicated in terms of like, we can see when it goes in, but how do you get a computer to know it goes in? And then what's a pick and roll, and what, just all the different aspects. How do you get a computer to understand that? That took time. And that's just XY data. And now we have all of this additional data. So that's going to take 5-8 years probably before we really begin to see the tremendous insight we can get from that, just like we have over the last 10 years with the amazing amount of insights that we've gained from the second spectrum data over the last number of years.
And so would that entail like results from specific offenses? Like what are the sort of, I mean, you mentioned as an example, whether field goals are successful or not, things like that. Is this like all encompassing in terms of what is going on the basketball court?
Yes, it's actually already been used at the Major League Baseball level, so that when you're watching a baseball game, you can actually go on to one of the MLB sites and you can actually watch the same game as if it was like a Nintendo game. And when I was at the MLB league office, I felt so bad because it's such a cool tool. And I literally was like, why would I do that? And I said, I don't mean to be a naysayer, but like, maybe that's my age, but I want to watch the game. I mean, I don't need to watch some like virtual reality version of it. And they laughed and they said, that's incredibly important. This is why. And so they showed us the play and then they backed it up and they moved the camera anywhere. So you could watch the same thing from any angle you wanted. And suddenly we were like, oh, let's see it like here and here and here. And I don't even follow baseball that much. And I was totally interested in what things look like. So at the NBA level, when you just think of like the way that you make a shot, how much of a difference does some of that really make? You don't know with a little dot, let alone suddenly, rather than a dot, with the actual body position, you can actually get into the rotation of the body and some positions like that will give us even more insight. And again, some of it will be insight for performance, and some of it will be insight for possible injury prevention or simply signs of fatigue. So that like in baseball, where they begin to notice that a pitcher is getting fatigued before you can see that in the pitcher, before the pitcher feels fatigued. And so those types of insights will be coming for us. And they're hard to tackle. So it'll be interesting how long it takes.
Transitioning to basketball and March Madness, I've noticed you've done a lot of work in terms of March Madness and just predictability. We're headed towards the Final Four. What are your observations of this year's tournament? Anything that stands out to you that surprised you, shocked you about this year's tournament?
Well, one thing I'm really proud of is that my researchers, we had 2 independent groups working on predictability measures. And before we started, we had both measures said this was going to be a humdinger of a year. So I'm really glad about that. But then when it comes to the predictability of our brackets, I always laugh because so often beforehand, the news media that connects with me will say, thanks to Tim Chartier for helping us make either perfect brackets or brackets that won't be busted. The only way that a bracket is busted in my head is if I think I can't be better than most people with my bracket. So like, I don't mind that certain things are off, and that like, I forget, there was one game that I went, oh, there was no way we were Oakland. I went, oh, that's just fantastic. I was like, our data wasn't going to capture that. And even when I look at it afterwards and I begin to see some things, I'm like, I can't do that analysis on every team right before. I can't do it. And the other thing is somebody said to me at one point something about the tournament that was in the last 24 hours. And I said, you always have to remember the pressure that they're under. And I don't know any way to pick that up in the actual season. So how, with all of that pressure, will an 18 to 22-year-old perform in that moment? And then you take the top seeds. How will you do when you fall behind and you feel the weight of history and the weight of everyone talking about you the next day, how do you feel that playing out? Like Kentucky, when you know, oh man, here we go again. Can you turn that off? And I think a lot of that's part of my thing when you point out, can AI figure all of that out? I don't know. And there's a lot in the game that's very psychological that I think goes a bit beyond data. And there's a certain amount of psychology in it that I think is a human aspect that coaches do tap into that goes beyond data.
Do you think it's harder in this day and age in terms of, you mentioned feeling that way, feeling the pressure of history because of social media compared to
Mm.
maybe 20 years ago? There's newspapers, there's television. That's easy to shut off, turn off the television, don't read the newspaper. But now a lot of the younger people, their lives are on social media. You can't tell them to turn off their phones because they don't want to. It's so ingrained in what they do on their everyday lives. How is that in terms of, you can't eliminate this thing because a lot of the student athletes are actually using it in their regular lives, and it's going to influence how they play on the court, just depending on how the game plays out.
That would be a fantastic research question. It might be one I mention to somebody tomorrow. Wouldn't that be fascinating to look at when social media was really, really kind of part of our lives, and then see how if you could pick up that performance difference before then. That goes to one other thing I would say to anyone out there. How do you get into sports analytics? You pose a question like that, and then you just ask yourself, is there a way to analyze it? Don't ask yourself if you'll analyze it. Who cares? Just have fun. Like, am I going to make the shot? Probably not. I'm a math prof, but I can go out and shoot the ball. And the same thing can be true with sports analytics, that you can just try and just dig in. And if you come up with something, man, you got a lot to talk to people about because you even have data behind it. And so you aren't just shooting the breeze with what you think. But those types of things are how you move into sports analytics. And when I give talks to kids, when I give talks to seniors, senior citizens, when I give talks to college students, you have the ability to create new questions that haven't been answered. And it's why we keep finding new things. And that was a great example. That's a really cool question that I don't know if we could answer it, but it would be awfully fun to try.
Yeah, because I just find it fascinating, especially with the women's tournament and the attention that last night got in terms of LSU Iowa, and just the pressure that I think a lot of women athletes are feeling. How that factors into, like Caitlin Clark talked about, the pressure she feels every time she goes on the court. I mean, I don't know how you quantify that 20 years ago. I think the pressures are different compared to now, where there is social media. A lot of these players, they're getting a lot of hype in high school, and a lot of your general basketball audience know who they are entering college, compared to, years ago where that wasn't really possible. So I just think that's fascinating in terms of how that incorporates to, what we're going to see in the Final Four coming up. So
Yeah, it's well said.
Tim, one last question for you, at least from me. If Matt, you have any other questions, let me know. What's the one takeaway you want for readers to take away from just your book, Get in the Game? What's kind of the one thing, once they're done reading it, that you want them to remember once they're finishing the book?
It's literally in the title, is that you can get in the game with analytics. And I know I'm a math prof, so it probably feels like, of course, you're going to want everyone doing math. That's actually, it transcends that. I believe that you can do math. I believe you already do math. I believe that if you are interested in sports at any level, how many points did Caitlin Clark have? Think of a statistic that then you're already doing math. And all you have to do is ask a question. And I believe you're even doing analytics. You would have a place in my analytic team, even if what you were good at was just posing the question, because the question is as important as the analysis. And I believe everyone gets in the game when they watch sports. I would just like more people to feel empowered by their ability to get in the game.
Very awesome. I do have one more question. I just have to ask because I'd love to know your thoughts about it. And it's maybe a little bit of a cliche question, but you mentioned, Steph Curry being this outlier earlier, which Justin and I would certainly agree. That also ties in with the 3-point era of the NBA, that started a little bit before the rise of Steph Curry, but certainly he put the accent on it. Do you see this trend in basketball? I mean, it's not a binary answer necessarily, but I mean, is Steph Curry one of the main reasons for this cause that you have this generational talent and things may revert back to a less spread game? Or just what do you think of where the evolution of basketball goes? I mean, could there be potentially like a regression to the mean? Maybe it's a bad way of putting it, but more of like an inside outside give and take kind of game.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have an honors thesis this term. I do actual consulting for the NBA on a weekly basis with the NBA League office. And one of the questions that we agreed that we'd work on is actually the evolution of rebounding, because these 3-point shots have definitely affected rebounding. Rebounding looks nothing like it did back in the era of when I was watching a lot of basketball with Julius Erving and Moses Malone. I grew up in Philly, obviously, and it just looks so different.
Yeah.
But one of the questions my student has honed in on, he doesn't have an answer for quite yet. We have another month of research for him to try to push it out. But it's such a great question. He said, yes, it's changed, but now he's actually trying to pull out of that. But is it helping the team? Is this change in rebounding? And I think that when we begin to unpack some of that, I understand that we have the whole kind of points, the points per possession and all of that analysis with 3-point shooting. But I do think there's some other auxiliary parts of the game that I'm not always sure that I know that there are very good people out there who've looked at that, but I do wonder sometimes if some of that will re-enter, and that, as you're pointing out, when you get another generational player with a specific way that they play, that in people like dunking looked different. Well, it definitely looked different after Dr. J, and then it looked different again after everyone was sticking out their tongue with Michael Jordan. And so I think you're right that there's a way that we begin to hone in on parts of the game. And one of the biggest parts of evolution is to take a biological take on it, when that new species pops up, you don't really see it coming. And so I do think that there'll be we'll see that it was there. We'll see that it was rising, but usually when there's this tipping point to when you're suddenly aware, oh, wow, we're in something new. And that's that we're very much, it's not new now with 3-pointing, but I think you have a very good point that we may see that there's some other way. It could come out of defense. It could come out of a number of different ways that will offer some new exciting ways for us to see basketball unfold on the court.
Tim, this has been a fantastic chat. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. Can you please let our audience know where they can find you on social media, where they can pick up Get in the Game, and any other projects you're working on as well?
Sure. So I'm on X, and my handle is @Tim Chartier. So it's my name. And if you can't remember how to spell my name, just put in March Madness, Davidson College, and then probably the word math. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of Steph Curry Elite Eight stuff. But I'm the Tim in the math department at Davidson. Right now, I have the Get in the Game book. And I also, in the fall, will have a mathematical journal coming out where, rather than just straight lines, it will be more of an artistic book rather than a sports-oriented book. But if you're interested in sports, I have various books related to some that are very much at the college level, and then other books. One book is actually more at the middle school and up level. That is something like it's something like X Games, but they changed the title a little bit. And that one's a little different. It talks about sports, but then how studying sports propels you into all kinds of mathematics, including how it helps you study the fourth dimension. So those are all part of the projects that I've done and that I'm moving forward on.
Tim, thank you very much for spending with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.